A very good morning to the audience, the moderator. Um, my name is Dr. Sivaperegasam Rajanthiran. I'm from the School of International Studies at Universiti Utara, Malaysia. The topic of my presentation is Liberal Islam in Indonesia and Malaysia, an intellectual discourse. Well, I would like to begin with a word of thanks to the organizers for accommodating me in this Skype session, as there has been a problem recently on the change of dates and stuff. Anyway, coming back to the topic of my presentation today, liberal Islam. And the two countries that I would like to discuss is Indonesia and Malaysia. Well, let me begin by stating the fact that the roots of liberal Islam, the thoughts, have their origins in two major sources. The first one is the Islamic intellectual tradition, and secondly, the modern Western philosophy. However, it must be clarified that the underlying assumptions of modernization, such as secularism, materialism, individualism, and a commitment to progress through science and technology, form the core of Western intellectual polemic against Islam and the intellectual justification for Western political domination of Muslims. Likewise, development, defined as the control of nature for the benefit of man, proceeded according to principles of liberal market forces, leading inevitably to secular and individualistic political outcomes. The tenets of these formulations are derived from the European Enlightenment principles of materialism and rationalism, as well as the Marxist concept of class consciousness. See, I would like to also state that Islamic modernists advocate flexible, continuous interpretation of Islam so that Muslims may develop institutions of education, law, and politics suitable to modern conditions. Modernizing tendencies appeared in the last decades of the 19th century in response to westernizing regimes and European rule. And to validate their re-examination of Islam's sources among traditionalists, Muslim modernists declared that modernism constituted a return to true Islam as originally preached and practiced, a claim put forth by many reform movements throughout Islamic history. So modernism's distinction among such movements lies in the philosophical and political liberalism displayed by its expositors, in contrast to the tendency in late 20th century discourse to regard liberalism as alien to Islam. And allow me to continue on. To the West, that the West has had a great influence on the development of Islamic liberalism is undeniable. Most of the political themes discussed in the current Islamic political discourse originated from the Western political tradition. Okay, and let me give you a definition of the term liberal Islam, just in case some of you are not enlightened with this the definition, which means liberal Islam. It is not traditionally found in Islamic scholarship. Historically, however, liberal thinking in Islam can be said to have first surfaced in religious discourse from the orthodoxies. Islamic philosophy and the tradition of speculative thought were not completely expunged from Muslim intellectual life. and this is something that has happened. This phenomenon is something that has happened from the beginning of the 19th century, where philosophical thought in the Muslim world emerged in many new forms. Philosophical analysis, which was strongly determined by a metaphysical style of thinking, turned to become more pragmatic questions. A new generation of Muslim thinkers became concerned with social and political questions that directly related to the real conditions of Muslim life. And one example of this particular person who I would like to, who is a thinker in Islam, who was categorized as liberal, a liberal philosopher, is Ibn Rushd, okay, who is the author of this book titled Bidayat al-Mujtahid, a book which discusses comparative perspective of Islamic jurists on Islamic law. Ibn Rushd suggested that man is endowed with reason and is capable of seeking and creating truth, in contrast with the traditional view which held that salvation and truth should be based on revealed religious doctrine. Okay, and one example of liberal thinking which emerged into the Islamic world during this time was actually due to the influence of religious liberation during the Renaissance of the 16th and the 17th century in the West. And the liberal group was initiated by individuals like John Locke, Rousseau, Adam Smith, and John Stuart Mill, who stood for individual liberty but denied moral values and transcendental aspects. Okay, and since the 18th century, a fraction of Muslims have been progressing liberal thinking in the world, including Indonesia and Malaysia, and that is the main subject of my discussion today, covering these two countries. Development of liberal thoughts in Islam was also claimed to have a continuity with the modernization of Islamic practice, which was conducted by some Islamic intellectuals like Jamaluddin al-Afghani, Muhammad Abduh, Said Ahmad Khan, Muhammad Rashid Rida, and others, whereby during the 19th and the 20th century, they aimed to bring the Islamic community around in the field of science and technology based on Western philosophy. And this development also had continuity with secularism, Orientalism, and the philosophy of relativism, rationalism, and nihilism. The main issues that concerned Muslim scholars during this period were the westernization of Muslim societies, taqlid, which means established legal opinion, which should be accepted without question, and the opening of the gates of ijtihad, which means Islamic legal reasoning, and nationalism too. In Southeast Asia, such liberal critics were promoted by people like Sheikh Muhammad Tahir Jalaluddin, Ahmad Dahlan, and Ahmad Surkati. In fact, the liberal Islam of the period is generally known under the rubric of Islamic modernism. And in Pakistan, we have this man, Fazlur Rahman, who was a leading contemporary modernist who was trying to advocate modernism in Pakistan, but it was a failure, as we know, because of Pakistan's rather autocratic or conservative Islamic style, as opposed to modern scientific style. Now, according to another scholar by the name of Uthman al-Muhammadi, the term liberal Islam was initially introduced in 1988 and was promoted by Leonard Bindar through his writings entitled Islamic Liberalism, a critique of development ideologies, and followed by Charles Kuzman's book titled Liberal Islam, a source book. Both these books, have been the main source of reference for the supporters of liberal Islam in the world. Muslim thinkers like Ahmad Khan, Fazlur Rahman, Ali Shariati, Abdullah Ahmad Naim, Hassan Hanafi, Muhammad Abdid Al-Jabiri, Muhammad Arkon, Abdul Karim Shraush, Fatimah Mernasi, Aminah Wadud, Nawal Sadawi, Rifa Ad-Hassan, Ali Al-Razik, Farid Ishaq, Ahmad Wahib, Lofti Shawkani, Rashid Ganashi, Omid Safi, and many more others have been usually related to the development of liberal Islam. At the same time, the notion of an Islamic reformation also gained currency in Western academic circles, where most of them reside. Now, since 9/11, the focus of several of these thinkers has turned more squarely on Islam in the West and the promotion of moderate against radical Islam. New interlocutors have emerged to join them, including scholar activists like Hamza Yusuf in the US and Tim Winter in the UK. Okay. Now, divergent voices of the later cohort of self-appointed moderates have been quick to refract their own brands of liberal Islam through the translucent prism of the Arab Spring, including Tariq Ramadan's post-left Islamism and Bassam Tibi's unreconstructed Enlightenment rationalism. In the discourse of liberal Islam, there is much emphasis given to freedom of opinion by anyone on whatever religious issues. The methodology that is subscribed to its relativism, that is asserting that the truth is relative and cannot be claimed by any one group. The rejection of religious authority is important for them so as to attain freedom in asserting their opinion or even independent reasoning, and only with this can the liberalization of Islam be achieved. Now, through the religious conservatives, though the religious conservatives are quick to proclaim that Islam is a tolerant religion, enjoining harmony and respect for other religions, their theological understanding still sees other religious adherents as infidels, or what they term as kafirs, whose beliefs cannot lead to salvation. Interestingly, with the increasing enthusiasm for religious pluralism, conservatives find themselves in a defensive position in claiming the uniqueness of Islam as the only revealed religion. Now, I would like to start off my discussion by narrowing down to the kind of propagation that liberalism went through in Indonesia and what were the responses towards these propagations, both in Indonesia and Malaysia. But let me start off with Indonesia first. As we know, the European domination and missionary activities stimulated the rethinking among Muslims here in Indonesia, especially among the modernist movements which emerged. Okay, and one example of such an impact of the influence is Muhammadiyah, which is a modernist movement.
5 minutes.
Okay, which is a modernist movement formed in 1912 in Yogyakarta by Haji Ahmad Dahlan. It would be interesting if you can read further on this movement by Muhammadiyah, because it has established a network of modernist schools to combine instruction in religion and modern sciences. Okay, such as improving women's status. It set up schools for girls and stuff, which was never before in Indonesia. This Muhammadiyah also advocated legal reform through a return to the Quran and the Sunnah and the exercise of ijtihad, independent reasoning. Now, after the achievement of independence in Indonesia, fundamentalism emerged to pose yet another challenge to modernism. Because, like nationalism, fundamentalist ideas have greater popular appeal than those of modernism. So, this was a key challenge that was faced by Muhammadiyah at this Reformation period, right? And the main problem was actually because of the issue on the secularization of the Muslim society. Because as we know, the conservatives or the orthodox Muslims, they are not in favor of actually defending secularization in Islam, because they claim that secularization is alien to Islam. So when these liberal Islamists, yeah, in Indonesia tried to separate Islam and the state, there was a lot of ruckus created as a consequence. Okay, and one example of this secularist which I would like to highlight to you is Sukarno. We all know him. He's a very important person. And another person that I would like to highlight here is Muhammad Natsir. Both these individuals were very prominent in Indonesia at this time towards their endeavor to propagate liberal Islam. Okay, another one would be Harun Nasution, and the other would be Nurkolish Majid. All these gentlemen were educated in the West, and naturally, when they come back, as scholars of liberal Islam, which they picked up in the West, they were trying to propagate it in Indonesia, and naturally, they would have a very difficult time in opening up the open-mindedness of the Indonesian Malay community, which were very much orthodox and or conservative, like how I mentioned previously, right? Now, besides Harun Nasution and Nurkolish Majid, another name which I would like to mention here is the former president of the Nahdlatul Ulama, which is Abdul Rahman Wahid, right? And also the Islam Liberal Network, yeah, which is another movement among the young generation of Muslims in Jakarta, who were also very sentimental and very much into propagating liberal Islam during this time. They were all actually seeking to develop an Islam that is non-literal, substantive, contextual, distinguishing the Arabic and local customary laws from the fundamental message of Islam, so that Islam may conform to national progress, democracy, and world peace. They agree with keeping religion and politics apart, although they do not reject religion-inspired norms such as equality, justice, and peace in the public sphere. They define secularism not as a resistance against religious expressions and institutions, and accept the limited, non-discriminatory roles of the state and the political parties in religious and civil matters. Now, liberal Islam, as we understand it, is a movement which therefore is not introducing a radically new understanding of Islam among Indonesian Muslims, and right now I would like to continue on with liberalism in Malaysia, which is actually a continuation of influence which was gathered from Indonesia. The experiences in Indonesia had been exported to Malaysia, and scholars like Qasim Ahmad, Farish Noor, Syed Akbar Ali, Zainah Anwar, Riza Shah Kazami, Astora Jabat, and Zainuddin Idrus, and organizations like Masawah, Jemaah Al-Quran Malaysia, Sisters in Islam, Interfaith Commission, Women's Aid Organization, and All Women's Action Solidarity, or what we call AWAM, and the Joint Action Group for Gender Equality, were all said to have tried to develop the liberal thought, or rather the liberal Islamic thoughts in religious matters among Muslims in Malaysia. As regards to Sisters in Islam, which I would like to single out in my highlighting here of an example of an NGO which was founded in 1987 by women lawyers, journalists, professors, and activists. They all focused on gender inequality, addressing such issues as domestic violence, veiling of the women, child marriage, polygamy, moral policing, and unjust inheritance, and promoting civil liberties, constitutionalism, and human rights. Okay, which all actually are to seek to develop an understanding of Islam as the religion of justice and equality in the modern world, right? And we found that Zainah Anwar, the president of the Sisters in Islam, for example, um, faced an inmountable task in trying to propagate these modernist ideas among the Muslims in Malaysia, because as we know, in Malaysia, surveys have also indicated that during this time, many of them were still very much, their mindsets were still very much traditional, and they always felt that women were, for example, inferior to men, and therefore the question of equality was very much a strange phenomenon in Islam. Okay, the movements of those who are influenced by liberal Islam is a threat to the Muslim community in general and Malaysia Muslims in particular, especially when we have. Now, why I'm saying this is because liberal Islam in Malaysia is difficult to spread widely because it is being monitored directly and indirectly by government institutions and NGOs, those in academia and the community, right? So these are some of the problems which are very common in Malaysia, and especially when Malaysia is being controlled by a set of religious leaders whom we call ulama, right? Religious scholars who have a very tight, firm hand on the day-to-day running of the Islamic or religious methods in Malaysia, with the religion of Islam being made as the official religion of Malaysia under Article 3, Bracket 1 in the Constitution of Malaysia. It's very uncommon to encounter any Malay Muslims at this time who are going to be receptible to the ideas of free thinking, okay, liberal thinking, and we find that they were not happy with liberals. I mean, the conservatives and the orthodox ulamas in Malaysia. They were not happy with the liberals because they claimed that the liberals were trying to introduce bid'ah. It means innovations, which will mislead the people of the Muslims, yeah, in Malaysia from the actual path that was construed in the two holy sources of the Quran and the Hadith. Right? They are afraid that a lot of interpretations in the form of misrepresentations, right, or deviations can occur. So this is one example of this. And coming back to the Muslims, they were also not happy that the hijab issue of Muslim wearing the hijab, yeah, what I call the head or face or body covering, is also not something which is very much entertained by these ulamas, right? And what else? And these ulamas are also people who have resented the idea of liberal Islam because they feel that there shouldn't be so much of a question of Muslims using the akal, the thinking, yeah, the rational thinking, in order to interpret Islamic ideas and stuff, because they feel that it will be a kind of distortion from the two important sources of Islam, and that is the Al-Quran Al-Karim and the Hadith or the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So with that, I think I would have summed up all what I want to say on the local phenomenons of resentment actually towards the idea of an Islamic liberalism, that kind of an idea which we now know that from my presentation that it has been not actually well received by the large segment of the Muslim community. Comparatively, Malaysia and Indonesia, I would like to also state that Indonesia is far much more liberal than Malaysia, right? In propagating these ideas, and Malaysia is still very much in the traditionalist mode, and they feel that the ulama's here in Malaysia feel that there is an imminent danger of liberal Islam, which can influence the general Muslim public, yeah, into deviation from the actual teachings of the Islamic faith. Now, may I just conclude very quickly? I have to skip because of time constraint. So, as we have already seen and we are aware, both these countries, Malaysia and Indonesia, Islamic liberalism refers to a religious philosophy that recognizes freedom in approaching Islam, primarily characterized by national interpretation in accordance with liberal philosophies and institutions. And one example of a man who I didn't highlight, I think I did highlight about Charles Kurzman. Okay, I would like to restate again his role in this whole issue of liberal Islam by saying that liberal Islam is a form of Islam that promotes such liberal themes as democracy, freedom of thought, social equality, and human progress. So we understand the fact that liberal Islam has emerged in a response to traditionalist Islam, which embraces the local customs, and to revivalist Islam, which seeks to renew and to liberate the fundamentals of Islam in the modern world. Now, in Indonesia, as we know, the Pancasila, the 5 pillars, yeah, consisting of monotheism, humanism, nationalism, representative democracy, and social justice, and with the national motto of Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, which means unity in diversity, was very much embraced among the local people there, who looked at embracing the social and religious plurality with their mind and their heart. Okay, and in Malaysia, however, this was slightly different, because in the Rukun Negara, even though the very first principle of the Rukun Negara is believe in God, but what actually it narrows down to is the belief in the Muslim God, yeah, Allah, because the religion of Islam, as I stated earlier, is a religion which is embraced by Malaysia as an official religion. So the question of having ijtihads, the taqlids, whatever that we call it, Islamic terms, cannot contravene the Sharia impositions in Malaysia, because these are set and they are carried out as it is. So there are no modernizations to these ijtihads or taqlids as we know it. Now, I believe that will come to the end of what I would like to say. But if you need to have further understanding of the liberal Islam in Malaysia, you can also refer to writings from authors like Chandra Musaffa, Anwar Ibrahim, Marina Mahathir, and Farish A. Noor, apart from Zainah Anwar. And with that, I would like to conclude my presentation this morning. I would like to thank you all very much for this opportunity yet again, for my allowing my presentation this morning. Thank you very much.